Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really moving concept that was born out of a fictional Harvard graduation speech by Noah Eckstein. And the entire premise here rests on one profound and honestly incredibly timely challenge. How in the world do we handle deep, fundamental disagreements without literally tearing each other apart? So that single question right there sits at the absolute center of today's exploration. I mean, think about why this matters right now. We live in a world that constantly, relentlessly pressures us to pick a side instantly, right? It demands to know who do you stand with. But here's the catch. When we rush to pick sides like that, we usually stop seeing the actual breathing human being across from us. They just become a symbol. And as we know, a symbol is incredibly easy to hate. Eckstein actually uses his own fictional interfaith family to really bring this idea down to earth. Imagine it, grandfathers who are Muslim and Jewish and a grandmother who was Christian. They never agreed on religion, not once, yet they loved each other fiercely. The big takeaway here? Unity absolutely does not mean melting everyone down into the exact same set of beliefs. It just means refusing to wound another's souls simply because they're different. All right, moving into section 1, the imaginary table. When enemies become human again. To really wrap our heads around this, I want you to picture a simple, round wooden table. So imagine this table. There are no flags, no assigned sides. People are just asked to sit close enough to hear each other breathe. And this brings us to a trap we fall into all the time, confusing understanding with agreeing. Seeking to understand someone just means asking, hey, how did you arrive there? You can listen, you can show empathy, and you can understand their path without ever compromising your own moral truth. Holocaust survivor Elie Wiesel hits the nail on the head regarding this boundary. He warns us that true understanding is absolutely not about excusing harm. You have to name evil. That's a requirement. But studying how ordinary people became capable of extraordinary cruelty, that is exactly how we prevent it from happening again. Empathy only gets dangerous if it leads you to compromise your morals and stop resisting that evil. Okay, section 2, the trap of contempt. Why politics feels so personal. Let's see what happens when we drag this table right into the fierce divides of modern politics. Why does political disagreement feel less like a debate and more like a total personal betrayal? Well, social psychologist Jonathan Haidt points out that our brains are practically hardwired to love a simple, tribal, us versus them story. To get past this trap of contempt, Haidt gives us 3 brilliant questions to ask before judging. First, what is their core moral concern? Second, what fear is driving them? And third, what truth might they be seeing that I am just entirely blind to? This lines up perfectly with a really stark warning from Christian theologian Russell Moore about what happens when political parties replace our moral conscience. Politics can morph into a false religion so fast, it becomes an idol that just feeds on outrage and the love of winning. The real challenge here is keeping your moral fire for justice without burning down your neighbor just to score a political point. Moving on to section 3, grief, justice, and war. Can human recognition exist before peace? Now, we're going to put this table metaphor under some incredible, agonizing weight, the Israel and Palestine conflict. The goal here isn't to solve the conflict in one sitting, but to ask if human recognition can survive profound historical pain. Looking at the Israeli perspective from author Noah Tishby, it is absolutely crucial to recognize the reality of Israeli fear. This isn't just theoretical, it's deeply rooted in generations of persecution. Safety and the right to exist without the looming shadow of terror are essential human needs, not just political slogans. And directly across that very same table, we look at the Palestinian perspective through Mustafa Barghouti. We have to equally recognize their profound grief, their demands for freedom, and the daily realities of living under control. This grief isn't propaganda. It is the lived experience of a people whose dignity and human rights cannot be put on hold indefinitely in the name of a quiet peace. The tension between these 2 immense realities brings us to a really powerful thought from Rabbi Sharon Brous. She explains that when you walk into a room filled with that level of historical trauma, the very first moral act isn't to speak. It's reverence. The sacred test here is refusing to let one group's pain become a weapon that erases another group's humanity. We have to let grief exist without forcing it to constantly compete. Section 4, comprehending the unforgivable, memory after atrocity. The stakes get even higher when we ask how this table handles the aftermath of unforgivable atrocities like the Holocaust or apartheid. We need to just pause for a second because this is heavy. At this table, there is always an empty chair left open. Elie Wiesel reminds us that a table without memory and without silence for the dead is fundamentally shallow. True peace isn't just the living speaking nicely to each other. It absolutely must honor the victims who can no longer speak for themselves. And this brings up a massive, morally severe distinction: comprehending evil versus straight up excusing it. Comprehending evil means studying how ordinary people become complicit, so we can rip it out at the roots. Excusing evil, that's hiding the damage and silencing the victims behind the excuse of, "I was just following orders." Actually studying the darkness is completely different from justifying the unforgivable.
So, where does forgiveness fit in? Well, theologian Miroslav Volf adds a really crucial layer. He says forgiveness is absolutely not just cheap forgetfulness, and it should never ever be forced on survivors. Instead, it's a way to free your memory from that toxic, endless cycle of revenge. It's actively refusing to let hatred dictate the entire future of the injured soul. All right, Section 5, the moral discipline test. Can many faiths belong together? Let's zoom back in from these heavy global conflicts down to the intimate scale of just one family, sitting around a single table. The mystic poet Rumi has this beautiful way of illustrating how this actually works. He points out that spiritual openness doesn't mean you have to melt every unique belief into one identical religion. You can honor the universal light without feeling the need to smash the beautifully different lamps that carry it.
Pope Francis actually echoes this exact same idea. He reminds us that a family starts with mercy, not sameness. Think about it. Love is truly tested and frankly strengthened precisely when the person sitting across from you is not just a mirror image of yourself. If we only love people who completely agree with us, well, that kind of love requires very little of us, right? Okay, so what does it literally take to pull up a chair to this table? To build a space that can hold such profound differences without just collapsing? We have to practice 5 incredibly difficult pillars of moral discipline: memory for the past, making space for pain, taking responsibility for our actions, allowing silence for the lost, and ultimately, practicing love. You know, it's super easy to look at this whole table concept and think, oh, that's just soft, that's naive. But Noah Eckstein argues the complete opposite. He says naive is believing that hatred will somehow heal what hatred has already broken. Choosing to stand firm in your convictions while still doing the hard, exhausting work of listening across deep divisions, that's not weakness. That is the ultimate display of moral strength. I want to leave you with this one final, really provocative thought to chew on. When the arguments are just raging around you and the pressure to pick a side and attack is immense, will you still see the human being across from you? Because if we win the argument but lose our shared humanity in the process, we've lost the entire soul of the table. So think about it. Who is sitting at your table today?